Okay, so we are continuing Siman Zayin, Shagged, which is the first Siman about Chametz. And to recap what we spoke about in the past Shir, was the first half of Siman Zayin. The basic topic of the Shagged is, does Bittul work for Chametz which belongs to a guy, but it's in your Rishus and you're responsible for it, so there is an Isser to have that Chametz. Does it work to do bittul on that chametz? And the Shagged Aryeh is saying that it does not work. So first, he discussed what is bittul, how does bittul work, and from there we would understand why it should or shouldn't work for the chametz of a guy that you're responsible for. And he brought two opinions. The opinion of Rashi, that bittul actually somehow destroys the chametz, since you're destroying it mentally, so that's the kiyum of the destruction of chametz. That was Rashi's opinion. Tos's opinion is that it works midin hefker, that it's taking it out of your rishus. The Ran explained it's not like a regular hefker, because a regular hefker, you can't just say it's like dust and it makes it hefker. You also can't just think about it, you have to say it out loud. And also, according to some opinions, it's not actually, doesn't leave your rishus until someone else takes it by regular hefker. By chametz, all of these things do work, and the reason for that, the Ran says, is because chametz doesn't really belong to you. Once the time of the Isser comes, so then it's yours. The Torah makes it yours to be chayiv, but since it's Asr and Hana, you don't have real ownership over it, and therefore the bittul works. The Shagged Aryeh agrees with Tos's opinion that bittul works because of hefker, and he brought the Raya that wanted to know about the case of the person that forgot chametz and it's already yontif, and the Gemara seems to say you could do bittul. I thought bittul doesn't work on yontif. That's what the Gemara is asking. The Gemara does not answer that's the opinion of Rabbi Yossi Aglili that chametz is mutar hana, and therefore it is yours on Pesach. So we see from there that something which is yours fully, you cannot do bittul. That works like with the way the Ran explained it. That bittul is a type of hefker, but it's only a type of hefker that works on something which isn't yours. So, when it comes to the bittul of chametz of a guy that you have responsibility for, so then bittul should not work, because since bittul is hefker, you can't make something which isn't yours hefker. Even if you could make it hefker, the whole reason why you're chayiv on the guy's chametz is based on a pasuk which teaches us that since you are responsible for it if it gets lost or stolen, so therefore you have a chiyuv of getting rid of it. You can't be in your rishus on Pesach. For you to make it hefker, you didn't take away that problem of the fact that if it gets lost or stolen, that you're responsible for it. So therefore, it would make sense that bittul should not work for the chametz of a guy. We brought so far one raya from a Gemara, and that was the question of the Chachamim against the Shita of Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda said that you have to destroy chametz specifically by burning. And the Chachamim asked against Rabbi Yehuda that if so, you'll end up holding on to chametz on Pesach if you don't have wood to burn it. That was the Chachamim's question. And we asked on that, why would he have chametz on Pesach if he can't burn it? If he doesn't have wood, he could just do bittul. So this was all within the opinion of Rashi, that said we're talking about before the Zman HaIsser, but after the Zman HaIsser, even Rabbi Yehuda would allow you to destroy it in any other way. So before the Zman HaIsser, that's when you could do bittul. So why do the Chachamim say that you'll end up having chametz on Pesach? Just do bittul. So he explained it must be that there's a type of chametz that you can't do bittul, and that would be the chametz of the guy that you took responsibility for. He brought another raya from Rabbi Yehuda's Kal V'chomer that he's learning from Nosar, since Nosar, which isn't as strong as the Isser of chametz, you have to burn it. So chametz, which is a stronger Isser, so certainly you have to burn it. If we're talking about a type of chametz which you could do bittul, so then chametz is not more chamer than nosar, because nosar you can't do bittul. So you see nosar is more chamer in that way than the chametz. So that's what those were the two rayas. So it must be talking about a chametz you cannot do bittul for, which would have to be this chametz of the guy you took responsibility for. That was all within Shittas Rashi. Rabbeinu Tam, though, he explained, and the Shagged Aryeh agreed with Rabbeinu Tam, though, that the Shita of Rabbi Yehuda is talking about after the Zman HaIsser. Means on Pesach you have to specifically burn it, in which case there's no chametz you could do bittul on Pesach itself. and therefore this raya would fall away. Okay, so that's where we were holding. We had that one raya, which only worked according to Shitas Rashi, which the Shaggad sided with those that disagree with Rashi in that Gemara. We bring another raya from a different Gemara, the Gemara in Pesachim Daf Samach Gimel Amud Aleph, and this is Os Zayin in the Mara Makomos. Hashochet es haPesach al chametz over below saseh. If a person shechs his carbon Pesach and he owns chametz, so he's over a lo saseh. Rabbi Yehuda Omer Afa Tamid. Rabbi Yehuda says even the Tamid shall be in Arbayim. If he shechs that with chametz, he's over an Isser. Rabbi Shimon Omer, Rabbi Shimon says haPesach ba'arba'asar l'shmo chayiv v'shelo l'shmo pater. The carbon Pesach on the 14th, if he shechs it l'shma, so therefore l'shmo, so it's a kosher carbon Pesach, so then he's chayiv. But if he did it shelo l'shmo and he made it a apostle carbon Pesach, pater, so he's going to be pater for the chametz, because it says only if you shech the carbon Pesach when you have chametz. If you shecht it in a way where it's apostle, so you didn't really shecht the carbon Pesach, you weren't yosei, you're a chi of carbon Pesach, so therefore the bonus is that at least you aren't over the isser of shechting the carbon Pesach when you have chametz. V'shar kol zvachim, all the other karbanos, being lishman, being shlo lishman pater, doesn't make a difference whether it's lishman or not, you're pater, because on the 14th, Rabbi Shimon would agree with the Tanna Kama that the only chiyuv there is for the carbon Pesach. Uva moed, and on Chol Moed, Lishmo, or on Yontif itself, Lishmo pater shel Lishmo chayiv. If you shechted the carbon Pesach Lishmo, then you'd be pater, because there is no such thing as a carbon Pesach on Pesach, if you bring the carbon Pesach before Pesach. So if you're bringing the carbon Pesach on Pesach, so it's not a valid carbon, and therefore there's no chiyuv to do that when you have chametz. When you have the regular chiyuv, you're not allowed to have chametz on Pesach. But this additional chiyuv of shechting a carbon when you have chametz is not applicable if you shechted the carbon Pesach l'shmo and it's in an improper time. It's not a carbon. But shelo l'shmo chayiv, if you shechted it shelo l'shmo, then it is a valid carbon. Like that's the din. A carbon Pesach, which it's not the time to shecht it, and you shecht it not l'shem carbon Pesach, so it's actually a kosher carbon. And shar kol zvachim bein shloshman chayiv. All other karbanos, whether it's l'shmo or not, you're going to be chayiv because all other karbanos are kosher, regardless of whether you shech l'shmo or shloshmo chutz min achatos or shach shloshmo, except for carbon chatos, which is possible. Right, so all that is, a lot of kodshim. But the point that we're trying to get out from this Gemara, this Mishnah, is as follows: that the chiyuv of shechting a carbon Pesach while you have chametz is a lo saseh, and not only is it a lo saseh, it's a lo saseh which is chayiv malchus, and we see that from the fact that it says in the Mishnah lo saseh, and it also uses lashon also chayiv and pater. So what does it mean chayiv on a lo saseh? Chayiv on a lo saseh means that Beis Din could give him malchus for doing such an isser. Now, if you could do bittul on chametz, right, which you could in general, and bittul is something you could do believe, you could think it, and that would get rid of all your chametz, which we said it works according to the Ran, according to the meaning, that's the way the Gemara says it, but the way we explained it working because of this din of hefker, and it removes it from your ishus. So then how can a person ever be chayiv malchus for shechting a carbon Pesach while he owns chametz? How in the world could the Edom know that he owns chametz? Maybe he used to own chametz, maybe he bought chametz, maybe he made chametz, but maybe at the time he's shechting it, he was already mevatel it. He doesn't have to say anything, he can just think it. So as soon as he thinks that it's batel, he removes the chametz from his rishus, and you can't be mechayiv him, and there's no way for you to know whether he did that or not. So you can never bring him to Beis Din and testify that he's actually chayiv malchus. So, according to the Shagas Aryeh, though, that there is a type of chametz that a person is chayiv for, even if he does bittul. Bittul doesn't work, which would be the chametz of a guy that he has responsibility for. So then, we could be talking about that type of situation where he is, he could be chayiv, and the Edom could know that he's chayiv, because they could be talking about a case where they saw that he wasn't mevatel it, they saw he wasn't mafker it. Even mafker is not going to work. They saw he didn't destroy it, they saw he has it still in his rishus, this chametz which belongs to a guy, and he's now shechting the carbon. That could be something Edom could know about. And maybe he did bittul, but bittul doesn't work. So that would be a raya for the sheet of the Shagas Aryeh that bittul doesn't work on that type of chametz. Now, there's really another way to explain, says the Shagas Aryeh. You could explain that it's talking about a case where he made or bought the chametz after the Zman Isser, because the carbon pasach is shechted in the afternoon, and the chametz already becomes aser after chatzos, Erev Pesach. So if he had chametz before chatzos, you don't know if he did bittul to it or not. There's no way for you to know. But if he only got the chametz after chatzos, you know he didn't do bittul, because bittul doesn't work after chatzos. Right? So we could explain it in that way. However, that explanation wouldn't work according to the sheet of Rabbi Shimon. Rabbi Shimon was one of the opinions in the Mishnah that said that there's a chiyuv. According to Rabbi Shimon, there's no Isser Hana until Yontif itself. This is a machlokes Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Shimon. The Rabbi Yehuda holds that Isser Chametz begins at chatzos, and then it's Aser and Hana forever. Right? Even after Pesach, it's going to be Aser. The sheet of Rabbi Shimon is that it's only Aser Hana on Yontif. Before Yontif, even after Chatzos, it's not Aser and Hana. You're not allowed to have it, but it's not Aser and Hana until Yontif itself. And then after Yontif, it becomes Mutter b'Hana again. We're going to need that point later on in this year. But at this point, we're focusing on the Erev Pesach. We're talking about someone shechting the carbon Pesach. So we're talking about Erev Pesach. Erev Pesach, according to Rabbi Shimon, you could still do bittul, because it's not Aser and Hana yet. The only time it becomes impossible to bittul is when you have the Isser Hana. So therefore, we can no longer explain that it's talking about a case where he bought the chametz or made the chametz after chatzos, because it still wouldn't prevent him from doing bittul, according to Shita Rabbi Shimon. So therefore, the only way we could explain this Mishnah would be it's talking about a different type of chametz that you can't do bittul. That would be the chametz of the guy that you took responsibility for. Okay, so let's move on to the next proof, which is the Gemara in Pesachim, Daf Mevav and Aleph, which is Os Ches in the Mar Makomos. It says as follows. Mishnah starts, Kitzad Mafrishin Chala Betuma B'Yontif. How can you separate Chala when it became Tameh on Yontif itself? Now, in general, there's no problem being Mafresh Chala on a weekday. Right? How do you Mafresh Chala? You use Mafresh Chala and you give the dough to the Kohen. Right? So it's not a big deal. On Pesach, you have a little bit of an issue because that dough is going to become chametz by the time you get it to the Kohen. But it's not an issue generally because you can just bake it and then give it to the Kohen after you bake it. However, when it comes to Yontif, you could generally bake on Yontif, but if your dough is tameh, you can't bake the challah because a Kohen can't eat the challah, which is tameh. And if you bake it, you're baking on Yontif, not for the purpose of eating, which you're not allowed to do. So now you have an issue. What are you going to do with the challah, which is tameh, on Yontif? You can't just take off the dough and leave it, because the dough will come chametz. You can't take off the dough and then bake it, because you can't bake something which isn't fit to eat. If you sell it to a guy after Yontif, what are you going to do now? You're not allowed to chametz on Yontif.
Fine to go and use tameh.
Even a Kohen who's tameh can't eat challah, which is tameh. But you have to be mafresh it, but no one's going to be able to eat it. Which is like what we do with our challah nowadays. Yeah, you can burn it, but you can't burn it on Yontif because you're only allowed to cook for eating. So you're stuck. So what do you do? So there just happens to be three opinions. Rabbi Eliezer says, Lo tikr l'shem ad shetofa. Bake the whole dough. Don't separate challah. Bake the whole dough. Then after it's baked, then take off challah. Right now it's matzahs, right? It's on Pesach, so you bake the matzahs. Then after it's baked, you'll take off challah. Ben Beseir says, Tafel b'tzoni. You stick it in cold water. He holds you can take the dough off, stick it in cold water. If it's in cold water, it won't become chametz. That's what he holds. Amar Yeshua says, Lo zehu chametz shematzir and alav b'al yer b'ayamatzeh. If this wouldn't be a type of chametz that you'd be over an isser, el mafri shasa, you separate the dough, umani chasad erev, you leave it until the evening, right? In the evening you're going to be able to burn it. If it becomes chametz in the interim, it becomes chametz. It's not yours. It's challah. Right? You can't eat it. It's not right. I mean, when you separate challah, you're not separating for yourself. It's for the kohen. But there's no kohen that you're giving it to, so it doesn't belong to anybody. So you're not chayiv. So you can let it become chametz. So those are the three opinions. So the Gemara says, Lema b'tovas hana k'miflugi. Let's say the machlokes is about tovas hana. Tovas hana means that I don't actually have a right to use this item, but I do get some benefit from it. I have some control over it. And that's really what the status of challah is before I give it to a kohen. Is I can't eat it because I'm a Yisrael, but I have a certain amount of control over it because I could choose which kohen to give it to. So that's the idea of tovas hana. Rabbi Eliezer savar tovas hana mamon. Rabbi Eliezer holds it's considered like it's yours. And therefore, if you would let it become chametz, you'd be over the isser. Because not like Rabbi Yeshua said, this challah doesn't belong to anybody, so you can let it become chametz. Rabbi says, no, since the Yisrael has control over it until he gives it to the kohen, so therefore it is considered like it's his, and he would be over this. And Rabbi Yeshua savar tovas hana ino mamon. He holds it's not considered as if it's yours. Therefore, there's no iser chametz. The Gemara says, lo, that's not the explanation. Everyone agrees it's not considered yours. Here, the machlokes is a completely different concept of hoel. What's the hoel? Hoel means since, but we're going to see how it applies. Rabbi Eliezer savar amrinan hoel v'ibai ishal alei mimonahu. Rabbi Eliezer says, we say since, if he wanted to, he could be shoel on his neder, therefore it's his money. Actually, he did have to do this once. Challah, separating challah is like a neder. So if you separate challah, it's as if you're saying, I'm making a neder that I'm giving this part to the kohen. Now, the part that you're giving to the kohen is also to eat. So what would happen if, a well-meaning kid would come by right after your wife was mafresh challah and say, what's this dough doing separate from the rest of the dough? I'm going to stick it back in the bowl. So now you have a problem. You can't eat it. But what you could do is you could be shoel on the neder. And you shoel on the neder, so you're undoing what you said, right? The whole hafresh was only a dibur. So I said I'm making a challah, so now I could be shoel on that neder and undo that neder, and now it's not challah. I can start over. So Rabbi Eliezer says, since I had the ability to do that, so therefore I'm chayiv on this piece of dough. Even though it's not mine, but it could be mine, I can make it mine just by being shoel on the neder. So since I could be shoel on the neder and make it mine, so I am chayiv on that type of chametz. That's what Rabbi Eliezer would hold. Rabbi Yeshua savar lo amrinan hold. Rabbi Yeshua says, no, we don't say that type of logic. Bottom line is it's not yours, and therefore you're not over this. Okay. So Rashi says at the end of the sugya, really the daf of Chesam and Aleph, we brought it down over here. It's the Rashi that goes over here on the side. It says Avohacha V'nir ba'inai. That's at the top of where I copied it. V'nir ba'inai. De'in hoel b'zeh v'davar sheinu shelo. There's no idea of hoel. You can't say hoel if it's not yours. De'nimel holi ba'i ma'iseli b'reshusei. That if you want, you can bring it into your reshus. Like that which we just said in the Gemara, Rashi says you can't say that. The imkain, because if that would be true, hektish dekaimalon aval ataro shel gavoa v'lo palag Rabbi Eliezer. Hektish, which we saw in the Gemara, there's a drasha that says you're allowed to see the chametz of hektish. Hayibai parklei v'havididei. Hektish, you could redeem it, and then it would be yours. So therefore, we see that we don't have this idea that just since I can make it mine, it's as if it's mine. We don't say that. We don't say that by hektish, and we're not going to say it by challah. And also the whole sugi wouldn't work out very well. And therefore, it would seem to be to explain as follows. That which it says in the beginning of the sugya, which we saw inside, that you have this hoel, take out that girsa. Rashi takes out that whole part of the Gemara. This is the correct girsa to explain the machlukas. Rabbi Eliezer savar minan hoel, Rabbi Yeshua savar lo minan hoel. Rabbi Eliezer says we say hoel, and Rabbi Yeshua says we don't say hoel. But not the hoel that the Gemara explained, that you could get out of your neder and make the challah into chulin. A different type of a hoel. V'achi perusha, this is how you explain it. Rabbi Eliezer savar shari lafosa. Rabbi Eliezer says I can bake the entire dough. Afal gav de sof ikachad lo chazile. Even though at the end there's going to be a piece that I can't eat, and no one can eat, because it's going to be challah tameh. Inkan Isser Malacha. There's no Isser to bake that. Ho'il, here comes the word Ho'il, V'chol Chada V'chada Chazilei. Since each piece he can eat, Damotzi L'Mishko Mikol Chada Porta. Because he can take off of each piece of matzah a little bit. In other words, there's nothing that he's putting in the oven that he can't eat. Because he can take off the chal off of this piece, he can take off the chal off of that piece, or he can take off a little bit of chal of each piece. So there's nothing that he is baking that he can't eat. In the end, in the big picture, there's going to be a piece that he can't eat, but there's no specific piece at the time of the baking. And therefore, it's okay for him to bake it. That's what Rabbi Eliezer says. Rabbi Yeshua Savar. Rabbi Yeshua holds, Lo Amrin and Hol, we don't say Hol. Because I'm going to take one of them for challah. And therefore, I can't just bake the whole thing, because some of it I'm not going to be able to eat. So since tovas hana is not mamon, and I'm not going to be over on it if I don't bake it, so I just leave it until the evening and I burn it. Okay, so there's a little bit going on in the sugya, which is not so clear. And the Shagat sometimes fills in these unclear points. And that is, let's go with Rashi's explanation for now. I think we're going to eventually have to go back to the way we have it in the Gemara as well, but let's focus on Rashi. So Rashi says that the machlokes is, as far as Rashi is concerned, the machlokes is, am I allowed to bake this entire dough? According to Rabbi Eliezer, I'm allowed to bake the entire dough. According to Yeshua, I'm not allowed to bake the entire dough. It would seem, on the surface from what we've explained, that what would Rabbi Eliezer say about being mafresh the challah and not baking it? We have no reason, from the reasons Rashi explained, why you can't do that. Because just like Rabbi Yeshua says, I'm not chayav because it's not mamon, so then Rabbi Eliezer also holds it's not mamon. The only machlokus we saw is whether you're allowed to bake it. So it would seem Rabbi Eliezer maybe has two options. I'm allowed to bake it, and I'm allowed to just be mafresh it and leave it to become chametz. Rabbi Yeshua says, no, you're not allowed to bake it, right? That's the machlokus according to Rashi. But separating the chal is okay. But it's not really the mashmos of the Mishnah, and the Gemara itself also is clear that that's not the case, and I don't think I brought down this line, it was just this one line in the Gemara. The Gemara says, Amar Rabbi Yeshua, Lidvarecha, Hari over Mishnah Bal Tasa Kumlacha. Rabbi Yeshua said, according to you, there's a problem because you're doing Malacha on Yontif. That works very well with what we said. That's the machlokus between Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yeshua. Rabbi Eliezer says it's not a Malacha on Yontif because I can eat whichever piece I want. And Amar Rabbi Eliezer, and Rabbi Eliezer said back to Rabbi Yeshua, this is a quote from a Brisa, Lidvarecha, according to you, Hari you over Mishnah Bal Yerabal Matzah. You're going to be over this or Bal Yerabal Matzah if you leave the chametz, the dough there to become chametz. So we see that Rabbi Eliezer holds it's a problem to leave the dough to become chametz. Rashi, the way he changed the girsa, didn't explain to us why. Right? Why would Rabbi Eliezer not allow us to separate the dough and leave it there? The Gemara said clearly, everyone holds it's not considered like it's yours. So what would be the problem according to Rabbi Eliezer? Just to allow it to become chametz. Sounds like Rabbi Eliezer requires you to bake it. Not just allows you, but requires you to bake it. Another question that the Shaggart raises is, why is it that you can't leave it and be mevatel it before it becomes chametz? And that's what we said about that case of the person that forgot the chametz in his house. So he said he made a dough and then he went to shul and he forgot that he had the dough in his house. So he could just be mevatel before it becomes chametz. Even on Yontif you could do that. As long as it's not chametz yet, you can be mevatel it. So how come over here we don't tell him that separate the challah and then you mevatel it before it becomes chametz? What would be the problem with that? So he explains as follows: that really Rabbi Eliezer Rabbi Eliezer holds that the problem with this piece of challah that I took off the dough is a problem of tovas hana. Right? Even the Gemara said everyone agrees that tovas hana doesn't make it yours. Rabbi Eliezer will say it's true, it doesn't make it yours, but it makes, since you have control over it, it's a little bit like yours, very similar to chametz of a guy that you have responsibility for. So here you have the challah. It's not yours, but you're responsible to deal with it. So it's similar to the case of a guy's chametz, which is not yours, but you're responsible for it. That's why you can't just separate the challah and leave it. Right? This is the Shagged adding in. The Gemara didn't say this. Right? This is the Shagged explaining it. And he says you're forced to explain something, right, which is left out. There's a piece missing here. So this is what the Shagged wants to explain it. According to that, you then have an explanation of why you can't just be mevatel it. Because, as the Shagged pointed out, being mevatel helps for something which is yours, right? And therefore you're taking it out of your reshus through hefker. But if the challah is not yours, you're just over the isser because you're responsible for it, like the case of the guy. And just like the case of the chametz of the guy, the Shagged says bittul won't work. So also in this case, bittul won't work. As this works well, this is the way Shagged is explaining the sugya together with his shita about bittul. He explains that this also, the difference between the two types of tovas hana work well with the maskana of the Gemara, that we have a brisa that Rebbe says the halacha is like Rabbi Eliezer. Now Rebbe, in Kedusha Daf Chesam of Bees, he holds that tovas hana is not momo. So if the reason for Rabbi Eliezer would be that tovas hana is momo, so then Rebbe can't pass like Rabbi Eliezer, because he just doesn't hold that svar. But Rebbe does hold like Rabbi Eliezer, as the way the Shagged explained, that even though it's not considered yours, but the tovas hana is enough to make you chayiv on the chametz. That's the explanation of Rabbi Eliezer. Now, that explains the sugya according to the way Rashi understood. Now the Shagged wants to explain the sugya according to the way we have written in the Gemara. And the way we have it written in the Gemara is also the opinion of Tosfos and the Rif, right? So Rashi said he has a different girsa, and he explains the Gemara one way. But we have a different way of explaining the Gemara, which is actually the way the Gemara is printed, where we said that the machlokes is, what did we say the machlokes was? That Rabbi Eliezer says, since I could be shoel on it, I could make it my money, so therefore it's like it's mine. And therefore I could be over this of Bayar Bay Matzah. That's the way the Gemara had said it. Now Rashi was bothered that, what about hektish? By hektish, you could redeem it and it's still not considered yours to be over the isser. So why over here, the fact that I could make it not hektish, make it not challah, makes it like it's mine to be over the isser? What's the difference between the two? So he says, you can answer that it's not really his, but it's enough to make him over the isser of Bal Yara and Bal Yamatzeh, similar to the idea of the chametz of the guy. Right? In other words, since I have the ability to be show on the neder, so therefore it's not mine. It doesn't make it mine, but it makes it as if I have responsibility for it, similar to the case of the chametz of the guy that I have responsibility for.
How about the chametz of the Jew? Some of those chametz, his name is York, they're the hatred of his guts. And his name is Chum, obviously. This is good. It's not my chametz. Why should I?
Well, if you're not responsible for chametz, then you're not over this, sir.
Huh?
If you're not responsible for chametz, you're not over this, sir. That's you do what you can do, but it's not. That's not going to be the isser of being mekabel achrayus, like we're saying over here. So, according to this explanation, though, of the Gemara, it's not enough this hoel to allow you to bake it. Right? We wouldn't say, according to Rabbi Eliezer, we don't say I can be mafresh the challah, and then since if I want I can make it mine, so I'm allowed to bake it because I'm baking it for a food purpose. Because if I want, I could eat it. It's not enough, right? That Rabbi Eliezer did not allow you to do. He allowed you to bake the whole thing without being mafresh. Then you'll be mafresh after that. He will allow you to do. But he doesn't say you can be mafresh the challah, and since I have the ability to be shoel on it, therefore I'm allowed to bake it. That much not. So we see this ability to be shoel on it doesn't really make it fully yours. It's just enough for the Bal Yara Bal Yamatzeh. Why? Because the Isser of Bal Yara Bal Yamatzeh, we see that sometimes you could be over the Isser even if it's not really yours. Like the case of the guy where you were Kabul Achrayas. So just like over there, that type of ownership is not doesn't allow you to do bittul, so also over here you wouldn't be able to do bittul. Because it works, the Shagas Arya's idea of this type of chametz, which is not really yours, bittul doesn't work. You have to explain that way, both to explain Shitas Rashi in the Sugya on Vav and Aleph, and even to explain Shitas Tosfos. So that would be a raya to the Shita of the Shagas Arya. Now, the Shagas Arya asked a side point, just to fill in all the blanks over here. I see I didn't put this on the Mar Makomo sheet. Maybe it's because I felt that I wasn't going to go into it inside, because I didn't realize we were going to split up two shirim and have enough time. But basically, the steer is as follows. Rabbi Yeshua, we said held Tovas Hana is not momo, and that means it's for sure not momo, because he holds I'm allowed to be mafresh as chametz, and I mean mafresh the challah, and I can let it become chametz, and the fact that I'm responsible to give it to a kohen, it's not mine at all, and there's no chiyuv. Even for Bali or Bali Matzeh, where it doesn't even have to really be mine, it's still not mine, and I don't have to be worried about the chametz. That was the shita of Rabbi Yeshua that we saw, not like the shita of Rabbi Eliezer we were discussing up until now. He doesn't allow you to bake it, you have to separate it, and then you can leave it and let it become chametz. However, he asks a question from a Gemara in Bava Metzia, and the Gemara says like this. I guess we don't have it in the Mar Makomos, so I'll just say it outside. I won't read all the words inside. But basically, there's a discussion about whether a person's chatzer could be kona for him if he's not there watching it. And it brings a story, which is actually, I would say, a famous story, famous by the fact that this Mishnah is quoted a few times throughout Shas, is that Rabbi Gamliel was in a boat with Rabbi Akiva and with Rabbi Yeshua, and I think Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah was also there. And he had some grain in his house that he forgot to take off Trumas and Meiser before he left. So he wanted to make sure that Trumas and Meisers were separated properly. So what did he do? He said, the amount that in the future I'm going to take off as Truma, that I want to make Truma already right now, and I'm going to rent out the place where his mafresh, the Truma, to a Kohen, to Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah. That part's actually not in the Mishnah. I made that up. Alright, but maybe he already took off Meiser. There's only time. I mean, already Truma. He's only talking about Meiser. I see. He's not. Rabbi Gamliel himself did not take off Meiser. Truma. I'm not 100% sure why. Right, Tzarech Ian on that. But he took off Meiser in this way, and then he rented the place of the Meiser to Rabbi Yeshua, who was a Levi, and by that he gave the Meiser to Rabbi Yeshua. Then he took off another 10th for Meiser Ani, and he gave it to Rabbi Akiva to be Zocha for Aniyah. Rabbi Akiva was a Gavai Tzedakah, and that was how he gave the Meiser Ani. Then Rabbi Yeshua said that the part that he's going to take off from his Meiser, which he needs to take off Trumas Meiser, that he's taking off and he's renting it to Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah. Right, so that's how Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah gets in. He's the Kohen. And the Gemara says, eventually, that the way this kinyan works, now is how can you give the truma in such a way? It says you can't do it with chalipin, because chalipin is like a sale, and you have to give truma and meiser. You can't sell the truma and meiser. So the way that they were able to give it over in such a way was to do a kinyan called agav karka, that I can sell you land, and then with land you can be also kona movable property. Anyways, generally, if I want to sell you, let's say we're talking about grain over here, if I want to give someone grain and transfer it into their rishos, they need to do a kinyan. What type of kinyan can they do? So we said chalipin they can't do, which chalipin would be like, you give me something in exchange, and then you're going to that grain wherever it is. So chalipin doesn't work for trumas and meisers. The other regular kinyan you would do on grain or any type of metaltal is you pick it up. But they can't pick it up. They're on a boat. The grain is in the city. So the only type of kinyan you could do is you could sell land, or in this case they were renting the land, and do a kinyan on the land. And the kinyan on the land can also, you could throw in, once you're doing kinyan on your land, you could throw in that it could be kona other things besides land together with it. So land, you don't have to be there to be kona land. You could be kona land with money. So Rabbi Akiva could just buy land from Rabbi Gamliel, or not even buy, he could rent the land. Renting is also a kinyan. He could rent the land from Rabbi Gamliel.
Or star also.
Or star. We can go to the star also. He could rent the land from Rabbi Gamliel, and then that works as a kinyan. And with that, he could make a kinyan also on the Meiser Ani. Right? So we see that this is how we're making these kinyanim. Now, the Shaggad says you could only do a kinyan agav if you have some sort of ownership on the metaltalin. So Rabbi Yeshua, who holds Tovas Hana, is not mamon. He says you do not have any ownership on something which you're supposed to give to a kohen, like the challah in the case of Psachim. So that means also the Trumas Meiser that he's going to take off from the Meiser he was given, he also doesn't have any ownership over. If you don't have any ownership over it, you can't do it with a kinyan agakarka. I mean, you could physically hand it to a kohen, but you're not doing a kinyan because it's not yours. So therefore, how does Rabbi Yeshua, how is he able, or how did he allow himself to give this Trumas Meiser, which according to him is not his at all? How can he make effect in a kinyan with agakarka? If it's not his to make a kinyan on. So that's a stira that the Shaggad asks, which really has nothing to do with our immediate sugya of chametz. But once we brought in the Gemara about Rabbi Akiva, the opinion of Rabbi Yeshua in the chametz of Tovas Hana, so he brought up this stira, and he says there's also another stira within the sheet of Ula, because Ula also involved Mitzia holds that Tovas Hana is mamon, and in Kedushin he holds that it's not mamon. So the Shaggad says, based on these different stiras, he actually has an entire sefer written on the inyan of Tovas Hana. And in that sefer, he'll explain everything. But of course, as we explained before, we don't have any of this farm of the Shaggad. They were all lost except for the Shaggad and the 6 farm we have on Shas, on Megillah, Tainus, Rosh Hashanah, not remembering all the Masechtas at Chagiga. Then there's a few Masechtas at the end of Moed that we have Shaggad and the rest we don't have. So this question remains unanswered for us. But apparently there's a whole sefer written on this idea of Tovas Hana. When do we say it's considered yours? When do we say it's not considered yours? That's an entire discussion. Okay, back to our topic. He wants to bring one more raya, and this we actually do have the Maram Koshis because it's a raya from the Gemara we already saw in Os Beis in the Maram Komos on Psachim Daf Vav on Beis. Amar Rav Yudah Marav, right for the top over there. Ha bodek tzarich sheyavata. If you check for chametz, you have to do bittul. And what's the reason for that? We skip down to Amar Rabba. Where is that exactly? Amar Rabba. Yeah. So it's first one line is upaturin. It's more than halfway down. Amar Rabba gezir shem yimsa gluska yafa v'dai talavei. Maybe you'll find a nice piece of bread, and you'll want it on Pesach, and you'll be over this. So, but when you find it, why don't you just do bittul? And we answer dilam mishkachas leil basar yisura. If you find it after the time of the isser, the laber shusi kaimi, it's not in your shus anymore. You're not going to be able to mevatel it. Damar Rabbi because Rabbi Elazar said, Shnei devarim ein b'reshus shaladam v'asana kasav kil b'reshus. There are two things that doesn't really belong to you, but the Chum say that it does, or not Chum, the Torah says that it does. Ve'eluhin, and they are bar b'reshus harabim. If you dig a pit in Reshus Harabim, it doesn't belong to you, it's not your property, but you're responsible for any damage that happens there. And Chametz B'Shisha L'Melech, Chametz after 6 hours after Pesach, also no longer belongs to you, because the Torah made it Asr and Hana. Nevertheless, you could be over the Isser if it's in your possession. Now, we hold like the Shita of Rabbi Shimon. Rabbi Shimon really holds, as we explained before, there's an Isser Hana, Midaraisa, of chametz only on Pesach itself. Erev Pesach after 6 hours, there's no Isser Hana. After Pesach, also is not going to be Isser Hana. And therefore, he says all chametz on Pesach is really, and we quoted this concept before, I believe, in the first year, is considered a davar hagorim l'mamon. That's how we explain really why there's a chiyuv for the guy's chametz that you're responsible for, because causes you either a loss or not a loss of money. So also chametz on Pesach, according to Rabbi Shimon, it's not yours because it's asur and hana, but it will cause you a loss or not a loss of money, because if you would leave it around until after Pesach, you'd be able to use it. So therefore, the chametz, you do have some form of ownership over it. And if that's really true, so then you really should be able to be mevatel chametz on Pesach, even according to Rabbi Shimon. Because the whole reason you can't be mevatel chametz is because it's not yours. But according to Rabbi Shimon, it's true it's not yours, but it is goreim lamamon, and therefore that perhaps should be enough to allow you to do bittul on Pesach, unless we say, like the sheet of the Shagas Aryeh, that the fact that it causes you a loss of money doesn't give you an option to do bittul, just like the chametz of the guy. The chametz of the guy, which is in your rishus, and you have responsibility for it. So you said bittul doesn't help because it can't be mafkir; it's not yours.
So you can't sell you can't sell it another way, in home way?
It belongs already. It belongs to the guy. Already belongs to the guy. So then you could destroy it. You'd have to destroy it. You wouldn't be able to do bittul. So you're saying you can't do bittul.
So you can't sell it to another guy.
On Yontif itself to sell it to the guy? No, because then you're getting hana. You can't get enough from it. So the chametz of the guy you can't do bittul because it's not yours. So also over here, this chametz, it could be you're over the isser because it will become money after Pesach. But that becoming money, you're over this, or you wouldn't become money after Pesach. According to everyone, you're over this. But the fact that it's going to cause you a monetary gain or loss after Pesach doesn't make it yours enough that you can be mafkir it, and being mafkir it's not going to make a difference. So that would be another raya for the sheet of the Shagas Aryeh that not all chametz you could do bittul on. Now, the Shagas Aryeh wants to know, though, according to Rabbi Shimon holds that a davar gorim l'mamon is k'mamon davi. Right? We might not hold that way. Right? So therefore, we just have this issue of it will cause me a gain or a loss after Pesach. And that's not enough to allow me to be mevatel. But he wants to say, maybe according to Rabbi Shimon, that he holds that something which does cause a monetary gain or loss later is considered as if you own it. So since chametz is going to be mutter and hana after Pesach, maybe I should be allowed to be mevatel even on Pesach. So that's what he wants to ask. So he has two explanations for why this isn't so. One explanation would be, just like we said before when we discussed the sheet of Rabbi Yossi HaGlili, that holds that there's no isur of hana on chametz at all, and therefore even on Pesach itself it's considered like it's yours. In that case, it's like it's fully yours. If you said something that's fully yours, you can't do bittul on. That was the whole explanation of the round. The only reason why bittul works on on Erev Pesach, is because it's not really fully yours on Pesach. So therefore the bittul is enough just to show that you're not interested in it. That's enough to take it out of your rishus. But something which is fully yours, bittul doesn't work. According to Rabbi Shimon, even though he does hold it's an Isra on Pesach, but since after Pesach is not going to be Isra and he holds davar gorim l'mamon dami, so therefore bittul is also not going to work. You have to do a real hefker. That would be one explanation within Rabbi Shimon on one side. Then there's another explanation which is completely to the other extreme, which is that Rabbi Shimon agrees that midrabanan you can't use the Pesach. You can't use the chametz after Pesach. As we know, the chametz shavar of Pesach is asur and hana. Right? That is the way we paskin. Even though we paskin like Rabbi Shimon, that the only isur is on Pesach itself. Why is that? Because the machlokes after Pesach between Rabbi Shimon and Rabbi Yehuda is on a dioraisa level. Is there an isur hana dioraisa after Pesach? We hold like Rabbi Shimon. There's no isur dioraisa, but there is a knas. There's an isur durabanan. That if you didn't destroy your chametz like you were supposed to, so then on a durabanan level, the rabbanan made it asur and hana. The fact that the rabbanan made it asur and hana is already enough that this chametz is no longer davar hagorim l'mamon. This money isn't going to cause me a loss or not a loss after Yontif if it gets destroyed, if it doesn't get destroyed. Because even if it doesn't get destroyed, I'm not going to be able to use it after Pesach. You're right, it's only Yisr D'Rabbanan, but L'maisa, you're not going to be able to use it on Motzei Pesach. And we find in the Gemara itself that from the time that Chametz is Asur D'Rabbanan, you already aren't able to bittul because it's not considered in your Shus at all. And therefore, according to Rish Shimon, you wouldn't be able to be mafkir chametz on Pesach. You wouldn't even be able to bittul. Your chametz on Pesach would be like the regular din we saw up until now within the Shita Rabbi Yehuda, that you'd have to do the bittul only before Pesach. On Pesach, you'd have to destroy it. Okay, so that's in the Shagas Aryeh. Just a little bit complex over here. Just to recap, the main idea that Shagas Aryeh wants to say is that bittul works midin hefker. It's a light form of hefker, and therefore will only work for chametz which actually belongs to you before Pesach, and therefore is not going to work for chametz of a guy which doesn't belong to you, that you could possibly chayiv the isser, be chayiv on the isser of bayir bayimatzeh in a situation where you took it into your shus and you took responsibility for it. So in that specific situation, bittul is not going to help.